Hello and welcome, my friend, to the second episode of Season 2 of the Minnesota Gardening Podcast. It is so great to have you here with us today for this second episode. And if you are listening to this one without listening to the first one, I highly recommend to listen to them at all in order, or just make sure to catch them all. But if Seed Savers Exchange is your bag, then absolutely stay here and check out this great episode. So really excited to have John Reynolds from Seed Savers Exchange here, and it was just a wonderful conversation about what's going on and trending in the seed world this year, because as we know, everything is all funky in the supply chain, and we talk a lot about that. We talk a lot about what you need to be doing now and what we can expect in the future. And if you like this episode, please make sure to run over wherever you listen to podcasts and give it a rating, and make sure to give us a really great review. We'd love to have it because it helps other folks find the podcast. And while you're there, make sure to subscribe, because we've got another season in the works right now that will come out June 1st of 22, and maybe a couple bonus episodes between now and then. So here is John Reynolds with Seed Savers Exchange. All right, my friends, hello and welcome to the second episode of the second season of the Minnesota Gardening Podcast. And so as you know, we are putting these podcasts into seasons now, and make sure that you hop back to the first episode if you haven't listened to that one yet, because we're going to touch on a few things from that here today. And I am absolutely honored to have another great guest with us today. We have John Reynolds, who is the Director of Sales and Business, and John and his family have purchased Seed Savers Exchange seeds since 2010 for his raised bed urban gardens, and is responsible for sales and business operations of the Seed House at Heritage Farm, and brings a wealth of digital marketing and e-commerce experience from his time in New York City. And so John Reynolds from Seed Savers, thank you so much for being with us here today.
Thank you very much for having me, Brad.
So today, John, we're going to talk with our listeners about trends in gardening. And so what you are seeing from Seed Savers' perspective of what changes are happening, what people are requesting, where things are going in the seed world. But first, will you talk about the incredible Seed Savers Exchange and what you guys do?
Sure. Yeah. Seed Savers Exchange is a nonprofit organization, and our mission is to preserve and steward rare and heirloom varieties of North American garden crops. So we steward a collection of 30,000 different accessions. A session could be, there may be multiple accessions of a single variety. For example, we might have, several accessions of an Empress bean that were donated by families or home growers from, a long period of time throughout the country. Of the 30,000 or so different accessions that we have in our collection, we make a subset of around 650 of those varieties available more broadly through our catalog and through our website. So the mission here at Seed Savers Exchange is to engage the public in the stewardship of rare and heirloom varieties of our heritage garden crops, and meet customers and meet people where they're at in their own gardening and seed saving journey, and do the work of continuing legacies of our heritage garden crops.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I want to also make note that you have easily one of the prettiest catalogs of anybody around. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous catalog that everyone should make sure to check out and look at there. And so, John, in the last episode, we talked with Dreams of Wild Health about seed rematriation and pulling indigenous seeds back in. And you guys are doing a lot of work with that at Seed Savers Exchange and have been having a couple of series about that. So what kind of impetus, why are you guys working on that type of work? Is there demand in the gardening community for it, or where are things coming from, and why is that important to you?
It fits really well with the mission of Seed Savers Exchange. I think there is historically been a focus at Seed Savers Exchange of varieties that may have made it over on steamships from the old world to the new world. But a part of the North American heritage seed crops also includes indigenous peoples, and those stories have been underrepresented historically. So it's a big priority of Seed Savers Exchange to bring those stories and bring those traditions forward and connect not only the broader public with them, but reconnect indigenous communities with the heritage crops that they had stewarded for generations in the New World. So I think it's very complementary to our mission, and it's something that we're very excited and proud to be taking a greater focus on in the work that we continue to do here at Heritage Farm.
Yeah, it's absolutely an awesome thing, and hopefully a harbinger of what good types of things are happening all throughout the industry of recognizing where we've been and where we're going and figure that all together. And so what other trends are you seeing in the seed industry and just gardening in general that impacts how you guys are working and where you're going?
Well, it's been a very interesting 2 years since the beginning of the pandemic. There's been estimates of near 85 million new people entering the gardening hobby since the beginning of the pandemic, and that certainly has translated into, that broad interest is definitely translated into interest in seed savers in general, and we've seen just a ballooning demand that has been really sustained since February and March of 2020 and continues through this day. So that broad interest in gardening in general, we're excited at Seed Savers as an entry point. I mentioned a little earlier, wanting to meet people where they are in their own gardening journey, and we hope to cast a broad net and be able to provide new gardeners or experienced gardeners with the seeds that they need to start their own garden. And from them, we hope to steward relationships, and I hope people will continue to grow their interest in gardening as a hobby and take on seed saving as part of their own interest. And whether or not they come with us all the way to being customers through the catalog, to seed stewards themselves, to maybe even potentially, members of our exchange network of seed stewards that exchange their own variety seeds amongst themselves. We think that growing demand is just a starting point because it has sustained, and hopefully as there's brighter days ahead and the pandemic hopefully is winding down, that many of the people who have found gardening as a respite in very turbulent times will continue to do so, and not only garden but find other parts of their journey, whether it's canning and preservation or seed stewardship itself. That huge demand in gardening in general, we are very optimistic about it being a long-term trend and not just a salve on the very difficult and pandemic times.
Right, and that's a perfect point of discussion there, is that this entire season of the Minnesota Gardening Podcast is about those newer gardeners and how they can continue their journey in gardening and help make the world a better place, growing their own food and all those things. And we have upcoming episodes on planting that garden and preservation and canning. Well, what kinds of ideas are you seeing? Are those folks that started just in March of 2020, are they continuing to grow their gardens? Have people dropped off now that we're, like you say, hopefully toward the end of this whole COVID experience that we've been through in the pandemic? Where are those people and how are they doing?
That's a really good question, and I think there's still a lot of research and speaking to people that we could do to get a better answer. But the trends that we're seeing early on in purchasing behavior and interest in gardening, with so many new people to the space, I think there was all different levels of familiarity with what the needs were. So in the early stages of the pandemic, when demand shot up like a rocket, we saw a lot of maybe what could be considered panic buying, or maybe just inexperienced buying in terms of buying large quantities of seeds. Somebody who was never a customer of ours before, we were seeing orders for 15 pounds of bean. Now, those people with urban addresses that are getting 15 pounds of bean might not be making that decision with the experience of what they actually need to garden. So we've seen a decrease in volume in terms of the quantity of seeds ordered, but the number of customers has remained high and has decreased, 2 years into the pandemic, less so than the volume of what was being purchased. So I think that is, one way of looking at that data is understanding that, the overbuying behavior, whether it was, from a run on the market of seeds to panic buying to just inexperience, the number of customers has reduced at a lower rate than the volume is. So it does seem to be a sticky hobby, at least amongst people who were gardening before the pandemic and among a huge swath of the population that have found gardening as a new hobby in the past couple of years.
That's really great. And what does Seed Savers Exchange do to help those newer gardeners succeed? Are there training programs that you have, or how does that work from your guys' perspective to help them stick with gardening and be lifelong customers?
That's a really good question. In spring of 2020, our marketing department worked on a video series of starting seeds and starting transplants and beginner gardening that we published through YouTube and is still available. That was a great method for trying to meet people where they're at in terms of new gardeners and just the basics of whether it was raised bed gardening or container gardening or starting seeds. And then as an organization, we've been putting material out through our website, through our exchange, through the Seed Garden, and Seed Titles are books that we've published that have a host of information on seed saving itself, because that is our mission first and foremost, is the stewardship and the propagation of heirloom varieties of seed. So we have a wealth of information available through our public YouTube page, through our website, through titles that we've published for the preservation of seeds and the stewardship of them.
So with seed saving and you guys as a seed company here, it takes multiple years to get enough seed for different things that are more, I don't want to say fad, but things that become more popular, and it takes a while to get that all through and the availability of those seeds to be there. So what kinds of things are you seeing as trends that are this year are people buying things that are different this year than they have in past years, or what are you seeing that's interesting in people's seed buying habits so far in 22?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And there is continued interest, the top 10 varieties that our customers gravitate to even before the pandemic, our Black Beauty zucchini squash, our dragon carrot, our Amish snap pea. Those things continue to be of the most the varieties that people are most interested in. But what we find interesting every year is, I had mentioned at the beginning of our interview that we steward a collection of 30,000 different varieties or so. Each year we introduce to the catalog between 10 and a dozen varieties that we bring out of the collection, and you're right to say it's a multi-year process to scale up those seeds and to clean them up from any disease issues they may have, or from just to bring them up to a scale where they can be supported in the catalog. And it's always interesting to find that those varieties creep into the top 50 or so different offerings that we have available. For example, this year, Dr. Culver's asparagus has been something that we brought out of the collection into the catalog this year. And to this point this year, we've already sold 1,000 packets, and we're just, barely into our busy part of the season yet. So it's great to be able to take these varieties that have been stewarded by, small hobbyists or people, and that were so special to them that they wanted to, bring them into our seed bank, and then to be able to introduce them to, a much broader audience, and then to have that audience connect with those varieties is something that is really heartening, and we see it every year. And the asparagus that we introduced this year is just one example of those things that's recent, and it's great to see a broader audience really respond to those things.
I am seeing on Instagram, so this is very insulated in my captive folks that I see, or Facebook's lets me see on Instagram, that I'm seeing a trend in the folks that I interact with toward more flowers and more zinnias and more dahlias and those types of things. Are you guys seeing anything like that cut flower gardening is becoming more of a trend this year, or is that not playing out in what you guys are selling?
No, certainly so. And it surprised me too, because a lot of the thought when we, saw initial boom in demand for seeds was an interest in garden crops, tomatoes obviously being a popular heirloom crop type, but cucumbers, squash, so on and so forth. But no, flowers continued to be something that we were surprised to see. There was, an equal rise in demand to garden crops as there were for flowers. And zinnias remain to be, a popular item. We have Benari's giant zinnia mix that's a very popular, our most popular flower seed that we offer. So much so that currently we're working on a project to create our own seed savers mix, different zinnias that perform well here on Heritage Farm. And because there's been such an interest in zinnias and cut flowers in general, it's led us to create our own mix that we're currently in the process of spinning up as we speak.
Yeah, I'm getting more cut flowers this year for our garden as well, because I think people just need more joy in their lives right now. Mm-hmm. Everything's kind of a mess in certain places, and just being happy is a much better thing. So that's really great. So now switch a little gears here on us. What kinds of things that you guys provide from Seed Safe Exchange and just seed companies in general, what kinds of issues are gardeners facing today, and you're hearing from your customers as to getting started with seeds? Are there shortages of things? Where are people at with that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think, my mind jumps immediately to the climate change and the impacts of that. Thinking to some of the other things I was preparing for our conversation, what varieties might do well in zones 3 and 4 where most of, I believe, your listenership is located. Questions like that, become a little harder to answer given climate change has, made it much more difficult to, know what we're going to expect from our climate zone. This year we had a very, again, another unusual growing season. We had a very late frost and then a very hot and dry June, and then a more traditional July and August, but then we had an early fall, and that really wreaked havoc on, some of the productions that we did here on Heritage Farm, our long season peppers, which we can, normally, steward here in northern Iowa where our headquarters is located. The long season peppers, they didn't get to maturity enough and didn't produce, viable germinating seeds. So that, I think, is a big challenge in general, and, impacts so many things in so many different ways. But, it impacts us here on Heritage Farm and everyone, because it adds a degree of uncertainty to what traditionally we could understand as, crops that would do well where we're located. So in terms of that, we focus on what we can do well. That's one area that we're responding to. And, we, have through our network of retail partners throughout the country and in many locations in Minnesota and in Iowa, where we have our seed rack programs. We provide kits, for the seed rack programs that have varieties that we've selected that would do well in zones 3 and zones 4. And those things are going to be populated more with shorter season peppers and maybe lettuces and arugula mixes, things that are early season, that are harvested early in the season. But even those, again, to bring it back to climate change, our lettuces this year, since we had such a hot and dry June, there was they bolted. Most of our lettuces on site here at Heritage Farm, bolted pretty quickly, and we missed in many cases, lettuce and arugula that we would expect to be bringing home to our dinner tables. Just went from small starts to, bolting lettuce in, a short amount of time due to the hot, dry June that we had. So yeah, the question is, what are the challenges? I think climate change jumps to the top of that list.
Yeah, June of 21 was absolutely brutal. It was no good. So that's interesting. I didn't really think about that having such a big impact on your seeds. And so what kinds of issues are customers facing? Are there, keep hearing about seed shortages and equipment shortages and things? I haven't experienced any of that myself, but are you seeing that across the industry at all, or you guys personally, or where are things with people purchasing? This episode is released in March 1st of 22, so it's a little hard to tell a couple months out as to exactly where that will be. But what are you seeing as of today in your experience?
Yeah, we have seen less of issues with seed shortages themselves, although that has been, a growing concern or a growing point of area of emphasis. But it's the other parts of the supply chain that have actually been maybe more challenging than any specific seed shortage itself, especially if we think back to spring of 2020. Our issue more was not with a shortage on seeds, even though the demand was skyrocketing. We had the seeds, but we didn't have the packets to pack the seed in, and that was a bigger challenge, actually, distributing the seeds. So, in the early week, we have beautifully designed packets. You had mentioned our beautifully designed catalog. We have beautifully designed packets, but in response to the surging demand and our unexpected need for packets, we were packing in unmarked, plain generic envelope seeds to just get it out to people. And we've since kind of responded to that and made sure that we corrected that mistake and had, more seed packets on hand than we could ever realistically use as a response. But other parts of the supply chain continue to be a problem. There's paper shortages and cardboard shortages, and those things tend to be more challenging than actually, running out of seed. It's the seed itself. We have, sufficient inventory. There's always going to be things that are crop failures that we run out of, but I think the story of the pandemic and shortages is more around the other areas of the supply chain, less around, the viability or the amount of seed that we have.
Right. And so with that, I've been having issues finding a light. I need new seed starting light. And that's it. They're either like $100 more than what I want to spend on it for the ones that I wanted, or they just simply aren't available. So we'll see how that rolls forward. And so as we're talking about our climate, and so most of our listeners are anywhere between zones 3, 4, 5, and some in zone 6 as well. But what are some, from Seed Savers' perspective, some underused seeds that people really should be looking at in our areas just to try some new things this year?
Thinking back on some of the other parts of the conversation that we have, my mind jumps to, short season peppers as things that, can do well here, even though we've had some challenges with long season peppers. And, our king of the north pepper and jalapeno traveler pepper and many of our herbs are all things that, will have short enough seasons, between, 60 and 70 days to maturity for some of the things that I mentioned. And also, fits in well with one of my favorite things to do is canning and making salsa and canning it so that, when I look out my back window right now at the, my snowed over frosted garden, I still have the sensory rush of the peppers that I pulled out of my garden. I can smell and taste, those memories from this past summer. So I wouldn't necessarily say that those are underused varieties, but those are things that, jump to mind that are, might not, be the first thing on anyone's mind when they think about gardening in zones 3 and 4. But, personally, and I think here at Seed Savers, when we're exchanging, homemade salsa or tomato sauces, that's, one of the most fun parts of gardening, because our window is so small here, but we can extend that window at least in our sensory appreciation of gardening by extending the season in the forms of being able to enjoy the benefits of the harvest in months far removed from when we actually made the harvest.
And I'm seeing a lot more folks than I've ever seen before this winter growing things like microgreens and indoor herbs. And I have a friend here in Shakopee who is growing bok choy this winter under lights and different things like that. Are you seeing more winter gardening happening? Is that you guys can accommodate?
For sure, yeah, and we hear a lot of that too. My own father during the pandemic, not only got into indoor gardening and staging herbs, but he got into woodworking as well. So made his own herb stage, and then located that in a south-facing window and has his herbs set up on there. So it's certainly a trend. So is a trend of urban gardening and container gardening. We've seen a lot more interest in our of books that we offer on both of those topics. There's been a lot of interest and demand there, and it speaks to, again, the 85 million people that have found gardening as a hobby. Seem to have found it across the spectrum, whether they're using container pots in their, patio in their backyard, or whether they're, tilling over lawn and creating their own gardens in their backyard. There's been a whole lot of interest, and certainly some of that applies to, indoor growing and container growing.
As we look at the end of our gardening season, so we're starting here in March with having the plan put together and the seeds that we need for starting, whether that's starting in the ground, whether that's starting under lights earlier in the season. What do people need to think about, John, when they're thinking about the end of the season and saving their own seeds? How does that work? And we'll get into it more as it goes into the future, but are there things that people need to be thinking about this spring when it comes to saving seeds?
That's a good question. And I think, most of the considerations around seed saving, and there's different methods, for saving seeds through dry processing or wet processing. But the good news is early in the season, if you don't have to put in too much consideration into the seed saving itself. If it's important to your seed savings needs to not have cross pollination, if you want to save seeds and then of your jalapeno traveler pepper, then having another pepper, within the same garden or within an area where they can cross-pollinate would be one consideration. Distancing or other methods of preventing cross-pollination. But if you have less of an interest in keeping your varieties true to type, and you're interested in seeing what might be produced by having two pole beans coming up next to each other, and crossing your rattlesnake snap pole bean with your provider bean, and seeing what that ends up looking like in the future, then you have less of a consideration around how you're planting those two things early in the season. Most of the seed saving considerations, like you had said, you think more of that into the fall and closer to harvest, when you're making decisions on when the plant has come to maturity, ideal for saving seeds.
And let's actually dive into that a little bit more on the spring side of things. So if you look at your catalog, the bottom of the front cover of the catalog says open pollinated, untreated, non-hybrid, non-GMO seeds. And I think that's all a beautiful thing. And how does the open pollination work as you're growing seeds at a larger facility like yours, or in the home garden, as to, let's take your rattlesnake beans, pole beans, for example. Do you guys grow them all in one area, and then all the different varieties of pole beans are separated by, 50 yards or whatever that number may be? But then how does that translate to what home gardeners should be doing in planning out their garden?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And not all of the seeds that we steward here at Heritage Farm are grown here on Heritage Farm. We have a strong and growing network of contract growers around the country, and that's particularly important when we talk about open pollination and keeping varieties true to type. We here in Iowa have crop corn, in all directions around us, which presents challenges when we try to steward corn grow outs or on site here at Heritage Farm. And that's really where our network of contract growers throughout the country can be, of help. We have, contract growers in, the southwest of the United States that are, where there's less of where there's more of a corn desert, I would say, and gives us an opportunity to have physical distance between productions of corn, as to not cross up different varieties. But it's just not possible to the same extent here in Northeast Iowa, where we're surrounded on all sides by corn.
And so how does a homeowner handle that then? Is it just separate? If they want to, like I have ordered rattlesnake pole beans this year, if I want to save those seeds, which I obviously will be doing, but how, if I want to grow rattlesnake in the future, is there anything specific that we should do? I need to keep them a certain distance away from each other. How should a home gardener look at that, or should they even care?
If it's something important to keep the true to type, then each crop type is going to have different distances where cross-pollination could potentially happen. So for corn, that area is going to be, up to a mile, whereas, our tomato you might be able to keep them more closely together. Resources on distances are, available, online through our website and through some of the titles that we publish. Seed to Seed and The Seed Garden would have, much greater advice than I could probably get into in much finer detail than this interview would maybe present an opportunity to. So the resources available through our publications and through the website for specifics on, crop by crop, what best practices are for avoidance of cross-pollination.
Perfect. And we'll link to all that in the show notes for this season's episode, so people will be able to find those. And then one last question I've got for you, John. You mentioned earlier about the Seed Savers Exchange members. Is that something that just anybody can go into? What are the benefits? We don't need to get into costs, because I'm sure that will change over time. But what does a Seed Saver Exchange member do?
Yeah, so membership is a great way to interact with the Seed Savers Exchange mission. Benefits of membership include access to the Members Growing Club, which is a network of members who will grow out similar varieties throughout the country and have an opportunity to share amongst themselves their experiences, and the same variety will end up looking in different zones throughout the country. Membership also includes access to our quarterly publication, the Heritage Farm Companion, which will contain stories of the work that Seed Savers Exchange is doing here on Heritage Farm, or the partnerships that we're stewarding with members and growers and seed stewards throughout the country. So membership, those are two of the big benefits, but membership is an absolutely fantastic way to interact and take part in the Seed Savers Exchange mission, regardless of where you are or regardless of your own ability to garden.
Wonderful. Well, John Reynolds from Seed Saver Exchange, thank you so much for being with us. Is there anything that I didn't ask you about that you wanted to share with everyone today?
No, I would say this was very productive. I really appreciate your time and the opportunity to come here and share a little bit about Seed Savers Exchange. If you are interested in starting your garden this year or potentially looking into varieties that you're not familiar with, I think the Seed Savers catalog is a great start, but we also have an exchange where you can network with other enthusiasts and seed advocates throughout the country and find a whole host of different varieties that are really niche or really broad. So Seed Savers Exchange is a great organization to come to regardless of where you are in your own gardening journey and learn a little more or broaden that journey to include other things that will deepen your interest.
And what's the website for that, John?
It is seedsaversexchange.org.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks so much, John. I appreciate it, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Brad, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it too.
Hey, real quick, my friend, before we go here, pretend you are in your garden this summer. The sun is shining. It's glorious out, blue sky, some puffy white clouds. It's solid 82 degrees, which is my favorite temperature, but it's nice and warm. You're getting some great things done out in the garden, and you grab onto this weed that you don't really know what it is, and within a couple of minutes your hand gets a little rashy and you start to itch, and you just don't know what exactly is going on. It's probably nothing, but you don't know. It might be something. And so you run over, grab your phone, and you Google plant rash, whatever you Google, and all the answers that come up are that, you may be dying of cancer, you may be whatever, all these worst case scenarios, and WebMD tells you some terrible things, you're going to have to be amputated, and Google gives you all these different answers, and it's just confusing and overwhelming and terrible. And well, that's what everything is like when you ask questions about gardening on the internet. So you go onto Google, you get 800 different answers. You go onto a Facebook group, you get 800 different opinions, and most of them are snarky about what you should be doing. And it's not really a great way to learn about gardening. But I've got an option for you. Today, the Minnesota Gardening Club is open for new members. This is the way we support the podcast and everything that's going on here at Minnesota Gardening. And it's just $10 a month. And the Minnesota Gardening Club is just an awesome, awesome experience. And I've gotten a lot of great feedback from it, and a lot of people who are doing really well, especially newer gardeners and people who want to learn more about ecology and landscape. And it's really, really great. So it's a gardening club for busy people. It's 100% online. And with the Gardening Club, we help you stay on top of your weekly gardening tasks, and that may be within fruit and vegetable gardening. We also cover landscape, we cover sustainable lawn care, and then learning garden plants and just different things. And so every member gets a free course, and so it's a foundations course to help you level of base knowledge about gardening and landscape. So it's really great for new homeowners. It's really great for people who just want to get involved in more gardening or want to build more of a gardening community, because it's a bunch of great folks who want to work together and support each other. We've got one-on-one coaching with me, a 30-minute garden goal-setting session with me, and you get 50% off of all of our courses and products as they come out exclusively for Minnesota Gardening Club members. So just head to minnesotagardening.com, and on the main menu, you'll see Minnesota Gardening Club, and you can click there and you can join right now. The price will go up for the Minnesota Gardening Club. The monthly price right now, it's $10, and the price will go up after the first week that this podcast is out. So March 8th of 2022, the price will go up after that. So make sure to, if you're listening at this time, you can join today before the price goes up. But it's a really, really great experience, and I hope to see you there. MinnesotaGardening.com.